A veil once white, now dirted by dust and time, caught the desert wind like a ghost too stubborn to lie down. It fluttered against the cracked steps of the old church, as if begging entry, but the doors remained shut. Above, the bell hung silent. No toll for fallen brides. No music for women who returned with more shame than gold. She stood there alone, a figure carved out of grit and refusal, her hands empty save for a tarnished wedding ring that had lost its shine long before her husband had lost his final hand of cards. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains and cracked doors, their whispers cutting through the morning air sharper than any blade. She ain't fit for a good man. Curse that one. Brings bad luck wherever she lays her feet. But her feet kept moving, slow and steady, pressing into the red earth like she meant to belong there, even if the land itself seemed to reject her. She had no dowry to offer, no child clinging to her skirts, only the ghost of vows spoken in a gambling den, and a last name that had been sold to debt collectors. When her husband died, he took with him not just his life, but the last thread tethering her to a place in this world. And yet here she was, returning to a town that remembered her too well, yet wished she'd stayed forgotten. By noon, the town's elders had gathered near the square. They called it a gathering, but anyone with eyes could see it for what it was, an auction in everything but name. She was to be offered, not asked, a wife for any man who'd take her burdens as his own, though their eyes made it clear they believed she had no worth left to give. She stood on the platform as though carved from the same wood, her chin lifted not in pride but in defiance of breaking. Her dress was simple, worn, yet clean. She had scrubbed it herself that morning in the river until her knuckles bled, knowing it wouldn't change how they looked at her. But still she had scrubbed. The first man to step forward was Jonah Tibb, the shopkeeper, a thin, self-important man who carried a ledger in his pocket like it was scripture. He walked around her slowly, eyes squinting as if she were livestock he wasn't quite convinced to buy. He commented on the stubbornness in her jaw, as though it was a defect, and when she didn't lower her eyes, he gave a satisfied grunt. Too proud for a woman who's fallen, he said, turning away with a flick of his hand, dismissing her like a cracked vase. Others followed, some out of obligation, some out of curiosity, none with real intent. They poked and prodded with questions wrapped in politeness but barbed underneath. How deep was her husband's debt? Could she bear children? Did she know her place now? She answered none. She owed them nothing. And then there was a silence, a shift in the air so subtle that only those paying attention would have noticed. By the fence, at the edge of the gathering, stood a man whose shadow fell long and wide across the ground. He was a giant by anyone's measure, his shoulders broad as the barn doors he no doubt built himself, hands resting lazily on the rail, as if the whole scene before him were but a passing thought. His face was weathered, not by years but by sun and wind, carved with a patience that could outweigh rivers. His eyes did not rove, did not mock. They simply held her in their gaze, seeing past the dust, past the whispers, straight into the marrow of her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The crowd noticed him then. Their chatter grew softer, uncertain. Here was a man who could take what he wanted, yet he remained still, watching. She felt the weight of his gaze, not as a burden but as a strange kind of shelter. For the first time that day, her spine eased, just a fraction, enough for breath to find its way back into her chest. But nothing was offered. Not yet. He made no move toward her, and she, proud and tired, would not ask. The sun began to dip low, casting long, accusing shadows. One by one, the men drifted away, their interest dulled, their cruelty spent. The platform emptied, but she remained, a lone figure against a world that had no place for her. Before she stepped down, her eyes found his. For a heartbeat, they lingered there, in the quiet space where words weren't needed. His look didn't offer salvation, only acknowledgement. He saw the fight left in her, and perhaps that was enough. She turned before he could offer anything, because she needed to stand on her own feet a little longer. The veil caught the wind again, dancing wild and defiant, as she walked away from the platform, away from the crowd, into a town that hadn't yet learned how to forget her. Behind her, the giant rancher remained by the fence, silent as the land itself, but the weight of his gaze followed, not in possession, but in promise, not yet spoken. But there, dawn spilled across the fields like honey, slow and golden, brushing against the wild grasses that swayed without permission, down by the riverbank. She knelt, hands raw from scrubbing the tattered veil, as if enough washing could erase what the world had written on her name. The water was cold, biting against her skin, but she welcomed the sting. It was honest, unlike the sideways glances, the hushed murmurs that had followed her ever since her return. The veil, a piece of cloth that had once promised forever, now floated limply in the current. She cupped it gently, pressing the fabric against a flat stone, the movements rhythmic, stubborn. That's when she heard them. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving with a kind of patience that did not belong to hurried men. She didn't look up immediately. She had learned not to flinch when Boots approached. But these footsteps didn't demand attention. They offered it. When she finally lifted her gaze, he was standing there, a folded linen in his hand, held out not as a gift, but as a simple offering. No words tethered to it, just an open hand. His face was as unreadable as the earth itself, solid, enduring. She looked at the linen, then at her veil, and understood. She took it. He gestured with a tilt of his head toward a wagon parked under the sycamores. It wasn't an order nor a plea, just a quiet invitation. She had nowhere else to go, but this didn't feel like charity. It felt like work, and work she could accept. She climbed into the wagon, settling into the wooden bench, hands still damp. He said nothing as he took the reins, the creak of leather and the soft snore of the mules filling the space between them. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a kind that asked for nothing, expected nothing. She found she could breathe inside it. The ranch was not far, a stretch of land that looked more like a canvas for toil than a portrait of beauty. Fences leaning like tired old men, soil cracked with thirst, but stood firm, like its owner. Their first task was a broken fence line that sagged toward the horizon. He handed her a coil of wire, picked up a post-hole digger, and began the slow, grounding work of repair. She joined him, their efforts wordless, their bodies falling into a rhythm guided by the soil itself. They didn't need introductions. Not here. From the porch of the main house, an older woman watched them, her hands wiping against an apron out of habit rather than necessity. Marta, eyes sharp beneath a brow that had seen too much to be surprised anymore. She didn't call out to them, just nodded once, a small smile playing on her lips, as if she was watching a dance both partners were too proud to admit they were learning. Later that afternoon, as they loaded hay into the barn, a voice rang out from the loft above. Well, if it ain't the ranch's new boss lady. A boy, barely into manhood, swung down from the rafters, landing with a thud that sent a cloud of dust into the air. Caleb, all arms and mischief, with a grin that could melt granite. She looked at him, momentarily caught off guard, before a soft laugh escaped her lips, the first and longer than she cared to remember. I'll settle for not being trampled, boy, she said, brushing hay from her skirt. Fair enough, ma'am. But Marta's already given you the kitchen keys, so I reckon that's a sign. She rolled her eyes, but the warmth of the moment settled into her bones. The days folded into each other, marked not by calendars, but by the quiet progress of mending what was broken. They worked side by side, repairing fences, turning soil, oiling hinges that had forgotten how to swing without protest. Their silences grew rich, layered with understanding. He never hovered, never instructed with unnecessary words. He simply worked, and she found herself aligning with his pace, their bodies speaking in the language of shared labor. In the evenings, the ranch house became a haven of soft lamplight and simple meals. Marta's stew simmered in a pot that seemed bottomless, and Caleb's stories filled the spaces where conversation might otherwise have been strained. But always, there was a quiet awareness between her and the rancher, an undercurrent of recognition that neither of them named. One evening, after a day spent wrestling with stubborn fence posts and ornery goats, she entered the dining room to find her place at the table altered. On the wooden chair where she always sat lay her veil, not as it had been, but whole, the tears mended with delicate, careful stitches, the fabric smooth, as if it had never known disgrace. No one said a word. She stood there for a moment, staring at the small, mended thing, feeling the weight of what it meant. He had done this, not for gratitude, not for display, but because it was something that needed fixing, and that was enough reason for him. She sat, her fingers brushing the fabric, not lifting it, just feeling the steadiness of those stitches. Across the table, the rancher ate in silence, never once glancing up to claim credit. That was not his way. Marta served her a full bowl that night, a subtle smile lingering in the corners of her mouth. And for the first time since returning to this town, she ate without the taste of shame on her tongue. The meal passed in soft clinks of spoons against pottery, the murmur of Caleb's endless stories, and the hum of a home that asked for nothing more than presence. When the dishes were cleared and the lanterns dimmed, she paused by the porch, looking out at the vastness beyond. She felt him there beside her, though neither of them spoke. The skies stretched wide, the stars indifferent yet beautiful, and beneath them, two souls stood, not as saviors or saved, but as equals who have, for once, found ground that didn't shift beneath their feet. She didn't thank him aloud for the veil. She didn't need to. When her eyes met his, lingering, steady, it was understood. Out here, words were a luxury. But soil between their hands, that was a bond no one could cheapen. Lantern light hung like soft moons beneath the sprawling arms of the oak trees, casting a golden hush over the town square. Music drifted faintly from a fiddle, though it seemed to lose its courage as the gathering thickened. Laughter mingled with the scent of baked bread and dust, a celebration more for tradition than joy. People wore their best faces, the ones polished for show and sharpened for judgment. She walked into the square with her chin held high, her veil restored and catching the lamplight with every step. It no longer fluttered like a tattered ghost. Now, it moved with the grace of something reclaimed. Conversation softened as she passed, a ripple of unease following her through the crowd. She felt their stares, not as daggers, but as stones, heavier, slower, meant to weigh her down. The wealthy landowner stood near the center, wrapped in a suit too fine for his heart, the former suitor whose rejection had been a public affair. His smile cut through the murmurs like a blade honed on cruelty. "Well, if it isn't the bride who couldn't stay wed," he said, voice loud enough to stop the fiddler bow mid-stroke. He took a step closer, feigning admiration that reeked of mockery. A woman with no man is like a mule with no cart, good for nothing but standing in the dirt. The crowd tittered, their cruelty dressed in politeness, masked by the safety of numbers. The words weren't new, but tonight they tasted bitter, like they no longer belonged in the air. She stood there, unmoving, her veil a quiet defiance. From the edge of the gathering, beneath the shadow of a leaning oak, the rancher watched. He had been still all evening, arms folded, hat pulled low, as if he was just another piece of the landscape. But the words hung too loud in the air now, and silence was no longer kindness. He stepped forward. The weight of his boots pressing into the earth was the only sound needed to hush 100 mouths. He did not rush, did not puff his chest. He simply moved as mountains do, slow, inevitable, unyielding. When he reached her side, he placed a hand on her shoulder, not with possession, but with steadiness. The kind of touch that said, "I am here. I see you." His voice, when it came, was low, roughened by years of use, yet it carried across the square like a river cutting through stone. "She's mine now," he said, each word deliberate, like laying bricks for a foundation. "Not because she needs claiming, but because I see her." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The air seemed to shift, as if the trees themselves leaned in to listen. His words didn't challenge the crowd. They exposed them, showed them for what they were, people who needed a woman to be less so they could feel more. From the porch steps, Marta clapped, a slow, measured sound that echoed louder than applause meant for show. Caleb followed, grinning as he leapt onto a barrel to declare, "Told you she was the boss." Just took the rest of you a while to catch up. The spell of mockery broke. The laughter returned, but this time it was different, warmer. Some lowered their heads, embarrassed by their own silence. Others nodded, as if the rancher's words had cracked open something they hadn't known was closed. The landowner, for all his bluster, found no voice to answer with. His smirk faltered, his gaze flickering away, retreating into the safety of the crowd. Power, when built on shallow ground, shifts easily beneath real weight. The bride stood tall, not because she was being defended, but because she was being seen, truly seen, and in that there was no shame. As the music timidly resumed, the rancher leaned toward her, his voice quieter now, meant only for her ears. "Do you want to stay?" She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with the certainty of something chosen freely, not offered out of pity or pride. Their hands were calloused, not from fighting, but from building, and now, together, they'd built something neither had dared imagine. Under the oak trees, with lantern light dancing around them, they stood in a quiet pact. The word mine had found new meaning between them, not of ownership, but belonging, not a chain, but a root. Around them, the town's gaze shifted, not with sudden reverence, but with the slow, respectful nod that comes when truth stands its place long enough to be undeniable. They had not shouted to be heard. They had simply remained, together. The sky had darkened with a storm that didn't announce itself in thunder, but crept in quietly, like a truth long avoided. Clouds hung low over the ranch, their bellies swollen with the weight of coming rain. The wind carried the scent of dust and reckoning. On the porch, side by side they stood, the rancher, steady as a lamb beneath him, and the bride, veil lifted, her gaze fixed on the path where riders approached. They came not with guns but with papers, yet the air held the tension of a duel. The landowner dismounted first, his suit out of place against the rawness of the earth. He held a leather-bound folder as if it were a weapon, his men flanking him with the smug assurance of those who believe paper can command what respect cannot. "I've come for what's owed," he said, flipping open the folder. The pages crisp and cruel. Debts left rotting by her dead husband. "This ranch, this land, stands on what I'm due." The words didn't strike like blows. They settled like dust, irritating, persistent, yet powerless against stone. The bride didn't flinch. The rancher didn't shift. What the landowner hadn't counted on was how roots hold beneath the surface, silent and strong. Marta appeared from the doorway, a bundle of papers in her hands, older, worn, but far more honest. She held them out, her voice calm but carrying. "Debts paid. Quietly. Years back. Paid by hands that didn't need applause." The landowner's smile wavered, but his pride was a stubborn thing. He gestured toward his men, trying to swell his shrinking authority. But from the fields, Caleb's voice rang out, boyish yet resolute. "We ain't working for thieves." Behind him, ranch hands laid down their tools, not in defiance, but in declaration. They didn't need fists. They had loyalty, a loyalty earned not with wages, but with respect. The landowner's bluff crumbled, but still he tried to hold ground. "You think standing still will keep the earth from shifting?" he sneered, stepping closer, though his boots hesitated against the porch steps. The rancher didn't move. He didn't need to. His silence was a wall no man could scale. His words, when they came, were not a threat, but a truth carved into the marrow of every beam in that house. "This land's been watered by honest hands. If you want it, you'll have to take us with it." The weight of that promise left no room for argument, but it was the bride who closed the distance. She stepped forward, veil lifted, her face unhidden, her voice steady. "You cannot own what does not belong to you." The landowner looked into her eyes and found no purchase. He found no broken woman to exploit, no shame to twist. He found only soil-deep resolve. He left his retreat not loud, but complete, the men who followed him glancing back once, only find themselves already forgotten. As the first raindrops fell, the storm broke, not in violence, but in quiet, cleansing relief. The earth drank deep, the ranch sighing beneath the weight of renewal. In the barn, beneath the soft glow of a lantern, the bride and the rancher found themselves alone. The air smelled of hay and rain, their hands dirty from the day's work, yet their hearts felt cleaner than they had in years. He sat on an upturned barrel, watching her as she wiped rain from her arms, the veil now folded neatly beside her. "What do you see here?" he asked, his voice gentle, as if he were asking not about the barn, but about the space they now shared. She didn't answer right away. She let the silence breathe, filling it with the warmth of presence. "Home," she said finally, the word landing soft but firm, like a seed in willing soil. No grand decorations were needed. No promises beyond what their joined silence already held. The storm outside softened to a drizzle, the ranch settling into the peace that comes after standing through a test and finding oneself unshaken. And if you were standing by that porch, years from now, you might still hear the faint echo of a voice that did not shout but carried in the bones of the land itself. Out here, roots grow slow but hold strong. Love doesn't shout. It listens. And when the world turns cold, it's hands like these, callous, kind, unwavering, that remind you are claimed, not owned.